Okay, this is part two of the presentation on chapter 7 and 8, and we'll just pick it up right at the beginning of chapter 8. Many social communities may exist within one culture. National borders are not the only lines that mark different groups of people. Groups with distinct ways of life can coexist in a single society or geographic territory. Individuals are affected not only by the culture as a whole, but also by membership in groups outside of mainstream culture, which are called social communities. This is a theory that I'll share with you. It's called standpoint theory. This is the kind of thing that you could write your short-term paper on. Standpoint theory claims that social groups within a culture distinctively shape members' perceptions, identities, expectations, knowledge, and so forth. However, belonging to a particular social community does not necessarily lead to a standpoint, which is political awareness of the social, symbolic, and material circumstances of the community and the larger power dynamics that hold those circumstances in place. Dimensions of culture is very interesting. There are several different dimensions. These are, again, kind of on a bipolar scale: individualism and collectivism, uncertainty avoidance, power distance, masculinity and femininity, long-term and short-term orientation, and indulgence and restraint. Let's talk about a couple in a little more detail. Let's pick two of the more um, obvious just by their description. The first would be individualistic and collectivistic. The dimension of individualism, collectivism, refers to the extent to which members of a culture understand themselves as part of and connected to their families, groups, and cultures. In cultures high in collectivism, such as Pakistan and China, people's identity is deeply tied to their groups, families, and clans. In cultures high in individualism, the US and Australia, people tend to think of themselves as individuals who act relatively independently. So we've talked about that earlier on in the semester, how the United States is a very individualistic culture, and of course many cultures are much more collectivistic, and then there's many cultures that fall somewhere in between. Then there's the dimension of masculinity and femininity. This is the fourth dimension. This dimension refers to the extent to which a culture values aggressiveness, competitiveness, looking out for oneself, and dominating others in nature, which are typically associated with men, versus gentleness, cooperation, and taking care of others, and living in harmony with the natural world, which tend to be associated with women. In cultures that are higher in femininity, Netherlands and Norway, the Scandinavian countries, men and women are gentle, cooperative, and caring. In cultures that are higher in masculinity, Japan and Germany, however, men are more aggressive. And we can certainly add to this list of cultures that seem more masculine or feminine. Wonder where the US might fit in. This might strike some as a little bit of stereotypical. Uh, Things are in flux, although I do think that most people um, associate aggressiveness with men and gentleness with women. Um, it's just it's something that we can think about. We can apply to different cultures and social communities, along with other different lenses as well. There's definitely a relationship between culture and communication. Communication is closely linked to culture because communication expresses, sustains, and alters culture. Your culture directly shapes how you communicate, teaching you whether and when interrupting is appropriate, how much eye contact is polite, and how much distance should be kept between people. So I'll just let you read the rest of that. And again, I'll put just the slides up so you'll be able to get the full text here. And once again, please read this directly from the text as well. And if you got a hard copy at the beginning of the term, you can mark it up and highlight it. But let's move on to the next slide. We learn culture in the process of communicating. We don't study our native culture to learn how to behave appropriately. Instead, we learn our culture's perspectives and rules during the process of communicating. So that's just something we learn in the process of communication. Children aren't born knowing that they should respect their elders. They aren't born thinking that women should wear dresses, etc. This is learned, and it's learned through communication. Culture comes through communication. It reflects our cultural values. It expresses and sustains culture, and it's a source of cultural change. I'll just leave this slide up. And move on to the next one. I think it's interesting in this slide that each time we express a cultural value, we also perpetuate them. Okay? Just common sense. And then communication is a source of cultural change as well. This brings us to a concept, pretty severe concept called ethnocentrism. And that's basically the belief that one's culture and or social community is better or supreme compared to others. And it's absolutely something that we want to avoid. It's to reduce ethnocentrism. We should remember that what is considered normal and right varies between cultures. And probably the best example of this historically is Nazism in Germany. So as you can see the swastika symbol there. So there are certainly extreme elements to culture as well that history shows us is something that we want to avoid on a collective, but also on an individual level. Another theory for you is called uncertainty reduction theory. When we encounter unfamiliar customs, we experience uncertainty. What does this behavior mean? What's going to happen next? What should I do in response? Uncertainty reduction theory explains that because we find uncertainty uncomfortable, we try to reduce it. To do this, we seek information, we ask questions, we listen and observe others, and we look for patterns in interaction. So this is another theory that you might choose for your paper. Now, just because we covered a couple few theories in this unit, I don't want everybody to choose this for their term paper, but this would qualify. You could take this theory and explain it in more depth, and you could apply it to your own life and talk about yourself going into new situations and how you try to reduce the natural uncertainty that goes along with that. This is an activity that we're going to do in class, but I'm going to move it online. So just take a look at it and think about it, and we'll revisit this in a participation activity or a discussion at some point this week. And this final slide for these two units. Next week, we're going to get to personal identity and interpersonal relationships.